Good afternoon and welcome to another session of the Tourette Association of America's 2021 Virtual Conference. I'm Angela Sullivan, Medical Project Manager at the TAA, and I will be the moderator for this afternoon session. Thank you for joining us for Handwriting Deficits in Children with Tic Disorders. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the Warner Fund and Pharma, as well as our donors and supporters for making this free conference possible. To support educational programming like this, you may visit tourette.org/donate to contribute today. During the session, we would be very happy to hear from you and include your voice in the conversation. You may ask questions or share comments using the questions panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player at any time. We will collect your questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Jan Rao. If you don't already know, Dr. Rao is a previous faculty member at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. While on faculty, she served in administrative, teaching, and research positions while continuing to practice in pediatrics. In 2010, with an increased focus in pediatrics, program development, and service to underserved populations, Dr. Rao was the first occupational therapist to develop and coordinate a behavioral program for children with tic disorders and Tourette syndrome, or known as CBIT. Following retirement from UAB in 2012, Dr. Rao moved the CBIT program to Children's of Alabama, a center of excellence designated by the Tourette Association of America. Dr. Rao currently serves as the Medical Advisory Board for the TAA and is co-director of the Children's TS Center of Excellence. So with that, thank you so much for being here, and you may now go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate that. And good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I want to start by saying that I am an occupational therapist. And some of you maybe that are listening today are also occupational therapists. So I probably need to start with, I'm one of those OTs that has kind of come full circle with regard to handwriting. Years ago, handwriting was, not that it isn't still important, but it was kind of had a very large emphasis of, especially with regard to school-based services in terms of what OTs were doing with OT practice in the schools. And then sort of everybody jumped on the technology bandwagon. I was one of those. If kids had difficulty with handwriting, it was, one of those things that let's give them a tablet, let's get them, get what is in their head somehow out for people, either on paper, spoken, whatever it was, to get their thoughts out of their head. And now I've kind of come back to, this whole import of handwriting again. So some of the things that we'll be discussing today, I hope that you'll walk away with a better understanding of just how handwriting can improve learning in general, that understanding what handwriting deficits are and look like for people with tic disorders, specifically cited from the literature, and then also that you have a better understanding of different intervention methods for people with handwriting issues that have tic disorders. So let's jump in. You guys probably have seen this one graphic about 100 times now over the course of 2 days, but we keep coming back to it because it has such importance to us. All of the issues that lie below the surface with regard to the iceberg are still very much at play, even with handwriting. The impact survey that was done by the Tourette Association and the CDC back in 2018, 42% of children reported coexisting conditions to be more problematic than the tics. That has relevance for our discussions today because of the anxiety, the attention deficit, the sensory motor processing issues, obsessive compulsive disorders, and even specific learning disabilities. If you're thinking about dysgraphia and dyscalculia, those kinds of things can impact and do impact handwriting. So is handwriting a needed skill? Is it still a needed skill? It's one of those things that has always been a very basic skill. When we think about education of children, they start learning manuscript at a very early age, or print, all the way to cursive. And I know there's some discussion about cursive writing. We'll get into that in just a minute. It's taught early in the elementary school, with then refinement expected over the years. Some kids' handwriting never really improves. Other kids go on to have just beautiful handwriting. And it can be a real source of angst, not just for the child, but for the teacher who's trying to read the handwriting, and also for parents. Written expression, however, depends on some kind of writing. There's got to be a way for an individual to get what's in their head onto paper or out for other people to see, whether that's on a keyboard, a display screen, a piece of paper, something. But handwriting is laborious. It takes a lot of time, and we'll talk about some other issues that can be related to it. So, it kind of leaves us with the question, is typing and or keyboarding the way of the future? For some people, they would absolutely say yes. And a lot of this depends on, the age of you as a person with tic disorder or Tourette. It also, and or, you as a parent, trying to decide what's best for your child at this point. Should you continue with, some might say, torture of having your child try to learn to write and then perfect their writing, or should you just move them to technology? So let's talk a little bit about that cursive piece. As of 2020, the updated list of 2020, there were only 21 states that actually required cursive writing in the schools. Now, that's being said, that was the requirement for the schools in the states. That didn't mean that, some teachers, if they wanted to teach cursive, they could certainly do that, but their states didn't necessarily require it. These are the states that actually had requirements for cursive writing. Some of the benefits of cursive, and we see this all the time in clinic when we're working with kids who have tic disorders, cursive writing slows you down. So it, anytime that you are rushed or trying to rush something, usually with regard to handwriting, your handwriting is going to be a little sloppier. It also is going to be one of those situations where your writing is more fluid. It does take more energy. It takes more skill on the child's part to actually write in cursive, but it's a more fluid act, and you're actually enlisting more brain cells when you do cursive writing. So there are some true benefits to cursive. When I, for instance, anecdotally, when I see young children who have just learned how to write in cursive, their parents will oftentimes say their cursive writing is so much better than their print ever was. And a big part of that is the novelty, especially if the child is enjoying the act of cursive writing as compared to printing. But the other part of that is that it actually slows them down. It makes them think about the construction of the letters and how the letters are then tied together. So there are some real benefits to cursive writing. And then we need to talk a little bit about, is there actual evidence that shows that handwriting problems exist for youth with Tourette disorder, tic disorders? And the answer to that is yes. There have been several studies looking at children that have tic disorders who are experiencing handwriting problems. But some of this literature, as you see here, because I have it bolded, also looks at some of the coexisting conditions as well. So Emily Ricketts and her team, actually, this is one of the most recent publications in this year, found that more children with Tourette and ADHD had problematic handwriting as compared to kids with ADHD without Tourette syndrome. So if you have that combination of Tourette and ADHD, the handwriting issues are likely to be more evident than if you have ADHD alone. And then a study that Heather Simpson, Dr. Simpson, and I and several others did last year. We had 34 subjects with tic disorders. We administered the test of handwriting skills, both pre and post study. And the findings were that the kids with tic disorders took longer to complete the writing task, and they also committed more case substitution errors. So they weren't sure when to capitalize versus not capitalize letters. They were also, there was more than a third of those that population that scored greater, excuse me, than 1 standard deviation below the mean. Now, this was a study where we looked at kids from the ages of 7 to 19, and we saw problems across the board. So the younger children, but also the older children, had real deficits here. More than 50% of our population that was included in the study were scored less than the 50th percentile. So we had some fairly significant findings in this. It's also, I think, of note to say that the one person that the kids got to choose whether they wanted to do manuscript or print form or cursive form if they knew how to do cursive with regard to the writing task. And one person chose cursive. And it's important to note that their writing was actually fell within normal limits. They didn't have any issues at all on the test. They were able to achieve the speed that we were looking at, as well as legibility. So the other, another study looking at children with OCD who spend a lot of time ordering, arranging, or checking their book supplies and handwriting may appear to be having problems with executive functioning, when in fact they are probably just trying to keep things on their desk in the proper place. So there's a lot of times, these kids that have OCD and tic disorders, what we find with those kids is a lot of rewriting of letters and or numbers. They're trying to make it look right or perfect. They are oftentimes trying to manage the space between letters and or numbers. So a lot of times their papers can get very, very messy because they're erasing a lot or crossing out. But they also lose a lot of time when they're writing because they are trying to make everything look a certain way. And if it doesn't, then, oftentimes that can lead to frustration and a lot of anxiety for them as well. So when we see problems with OCD, a lot of times it's pretty clear, what's actually going on. But this is another group of kids with a coexisting condition that can have real difficulties with writing. There was a systematic review done out of Canada looking at handwriting intervention, and they looked at sensory motor intervention, relaxation, including visual imagery, and then also specific handwriting intervention from OTs in schools that were done. What they found in the studies that regardless of approach, didn't matter if they were having the kids, kind of try to relax and reduce anxiety, if that was a cause of error or losing time with regard to writing, or they were having visual spatial or visual perceptual problems and that affected their writing. It didn't matter what approach they actually used. What they found is if there was less than 20 minutes of handwriting practice per session, they found their writing to be ineffective. So this leads us to think that years ago, kids had to be, I think most of us would refer to it as handwriting drills, which kids usually hate, where you're, just practicing that rote graphomotor kind of skill. And that is what is now being shown as to be, one of the most effective ways. Now, this was a little bit dated, 2011, but subsequent studies have found very similar findings. So, it's kind of like we've gone full circle again, where we sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater, and now we're saying that handwriting practice actually does help. So what are some of those reported problems for people with tic disorders? Well, certainly hand cramping. In the study that we did, a lot of anecdotal information that came back to us were, kids complaining of their hands cramping. There was fatigue with writing. Some of that was because of their insufficient hand grasp with writing. We saw just about every kind of grasp you can imagine. The case errors, as I mentioned, decreased speed, which is a big part of the frustration that happens with handwriting, especially as kids age in school. Expectations get greater for them. They really need to be able to keep up with their peers with regard to writing, but they also need to be able to read what they wrote. So it's a real problem when, you take notes for yourself and then you get home and either you have, big gaps in the information because you weren't able to keep up, or you can't read what you wrote yourself. So, for a child, a student to be successful in school, they need to be able to keep up with the writing, which translates to speed, but then they also need to have legible handwriting as well, with as few errors as possible. So, all of that obviously translates to increased anxiety and frustration, both for the child, but also for the parent. And then let's don't take teachers out of this equation. It's very frustrating for teachers. It takes a lot of time on their part to, read and look over the written material of a person with tic disorders that has handwriting issues. They are probably losing points, or they're taking away points, and so the student is losing points for their handwriting. And it doesn't take long for that whole all of those factors together to equate to a situation where I don't like to write, I don't want to write, and then my grades start going down. So there is a deterioration in writing over time. A lot of times parents will say to us in clinic that their child's handwriting used to be pretty good when they first learned to write. And then when they learned cursive, if they learned cursive, their handwriting actually improved, but over the years, their handwriting has actually deteriorated. And some of these above situations can be the cause of that. We know from studies that have been done with people, both adults and children, actually wearing electrodes when they write, that portions of the brain light up when you're writing. It's your brain is very active when you're writing. Not only are you concentrating and focused on the actual construction and formation of letters or numbers, but you're synthesizing information at the same time, depending on what you're trying to write. So if you're copying out of a book or copying from a smart board, or if it's generation of thought on your own, your brain is very active during those times. Okay, so that takes us right into the impact of writing on learning. There's actual, evidence that says that people learn more when they write as compared to typing. So in this particular slide, we see that in concept retention, people who typed had less retention of material than those who wrote. Now, there were some problems along the way for people. These students were split up into two groups, a group that took notes by hand, and then a group that actually typed or used keyboards. And in this particular construct of conceptual recall, the kids or the students who actually wrote retained more of the information by a large margin as compared to those who used the keyboard. Equally, those who wrote their notes actually performed better on test than those who used the keyboard. Now, those who typed did have more lengthy notes, so they actually had more information in their notes as compared to those who wrote their notes, actually used graphomotor skills to write their notes. But overall exam performance was still better, and again, significantly better for those who wrote. In the end, what this study found was that the improvement on learning was significantly statistically significant for those people who wrote their notes as compared to those who used keyboard. Some of the reasoning behind this was that when we type, when you use a keyboard and you're actually typing, you're not thinking at the same time of the material that you're writing. It doesn't use the same part of the brain, and so it becomes a very almost habitual kind of thing to use a keyboard as compared to writing. So just the thought process behind keyboarding is very different than that of writing. And so more learning occurs when you're actually writing. And then, as we've seen from the previous slide, more retention also occurs. Okay, so for those of you in the audience who are thinking, well, this is great, but I have a 15-year-old who is not going to take the time to learn how to write better, either to make it more legible for them or to speed up their writing. So at this point in time, I really just need to depend on technology. And you're probably right. And that might be the argument even for some younger children. But there are benefits to technology as well. And depending on some of the courses that you've already listened to, you may already know all about these. You may have sought these out on your own. But the Echo Smart Pen is a really nice piece of technology. It records both the lecture that is happening, but also it records the writing that takes place on part of the individual. It's downloadable so that you can plug it in via USB to a computer, and then that information can then be printed off if you want. So it definitely is a great piece of technology. It's not that expensive. Here's the website for you to look at that if you want. It's definitely something to think about for that high school student or that college student who really is still struggling quite a bit with regard to handwriting. There's also speech to text. For some people, especially with regard to those folks that have many of the coexisting conditions as well, ADHD, maybe OCD, that may be so impairing to them that they just cannot do the act of writing, then maybe speech to text is the way to go, where they basically speak into the computer or their phone or a digital recorder, and then that is translated to text, which can then, of course, be printed for them. There's Apple Dictation, Windows 10 speech recognition, Dragon Anywhere, and then also Google Docs voice typing. Most of these are free and come now on technology, tablets, Surface notepads, those kinds of things. That's part of their software that is included for persons with disabilities. But if you do wind up having to pay, the fees for any and all of these are quite nominal. There's also CoWriter, which is software that's out from donjohnston.com, or you can also get it as a Google Chrome extension. And I actually have used or recommended CoWriter for a lot of students that I've evaluated in school systems that, clearly have the information in their head that they want to be able to impart to others, but have real difficulty getting it on paper. We know that written expression is a big problem for people with tic disorders, and specifically Tourette. And then if you, again, layer those coexisting conditions on top of that, it can be very, very difficult for these individuals to get their thoughts on paper. CoWriter really helps. It provides a lot of scaffolding, word prediction. It learns kind of your themes and the way that you write over time. So it really does project a lot of thoughts for you to then choose from. It also tries to string thoughts and words together for full sentences and paragraphs. So CoWriter, it does take some setting up, and it takes, obviously, like any of these, it takes a little getting used to. But there are a lot of students that use CoWriter that are very successful writers because of that. I mentioned digital recorders. Digital recorders are great, especially nowadays. Again, you speak into them, you plug it in via USB, and basically have everything that was in your head and that you were able to say into the recorder now on a screen or on a piece of paper because you printed it. Also, OneNote by Microsoft is another terrific tool. I myself use OneNote. I find it to be very helpful for both taking notes, but then also being able to pull all of that information together into a full document. From the OneNote document itself, you can share with others. So if students, especially those students that are still doing virtual or remote, they can share that through an email. They can, print it out if they need to, or they can just copy and paste it into a Word document or create a PDF, whichever they need to do at that point. So any and all of these are really great, recommendations, but also options for people who just find themselves in a situation now where they, it's either kind of not too late for them to do anything about their writing, but maybe they just don't have the will at this point to do anything about their writing, and they just need to move on and make sure that what they have in their head and their thoughts and their ideas are, available to other people, specifically when it comes to being graded on that with regard to school or high school or college. Okay, and so I wanted to take some time and talk a little bit about an intervention study that I'm doing actually. I hope this isn't too solicitous of me, but there is, based on all of this information, the study that Dr. Simpson and I did with others and published back last year, what we found again is that this group of people with tic disorders obviously do have difficulty with handwriting. There wasn't a lot in the literature when we first started the study, and more has become available since then. But we again are looking at youth from 7 to 17 years of age, where we're hoping that through this intervention study, we're actually able to improve handwriting. Now, I suspect, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that a lot of the younger people in the study will make larger improvements just because their writing isn't as ingrained as, compared to a 15, 16, 17-year-old. But I'm hoping that there's still improvement that can be made even with the older students as well. So what we're doing in this particular study is it's over a 12-week period of time. People commit to 5 of 7 days a week where they'll do some writing, 15 to 20 minutes a day. It's part of that writing will be using an interactive tablet that we send to the individual to be able to do that on. And with that interactive tablet, they actually get feedback. If they're pressing too hard, or if they've made an error somehow in the formation of their letters or numbers, they get feedback in real time. So it allows them to make those improvements as they're writing. Which is a little bit different. Most of the time, people write whatever it is they're going to write, they turn it in, or they have mom or dad look at it, and then they get the feedback after the fact, which is not necessarily as good as getting feedback while you're actually doing the act of writing. So for those of you that have kids that fit this criteria, 7 to 17 years of age with a confirmed diagnosis of tic disorder or Tourette, any comorbid or coexisting condition is accepted, except they cannot have an official diagnosis of anxiety or an official learning disability, such as dysgraphia. They can't have those 2 diagnoses. The reason for that is in the study that we did in last year that was published, 2020, and part of it was because the study sample was so small, we weren't able to tease out these 2 specific diagnoses in our results. It seemed that a lot of times kids with extreme anxiety, just anecdotally, again, we didn't have enough information to make this statement quantitatively, but it seemed that the kids with severe anxiety had more difficulty with the timed writings. And then, of course, the kids with dysgraphia had a lot of difficulty. So just to make this a little cleaner, those 2 diagnoses we are ruling out for this particular study. So you have my information there at the bottom if you're interested, if you think your child would be interested. I know it's a big endeavor, 5 days a week, 15 to 20 minutes a day, but hopefully, we'll get enough kids to be able to do the study. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. And just in closing, I guess, and I know I'm really early, so we'll leave lots of times for question. But in closing, I think it's important, for the OTs maybe listening, but also the parents and teachers and people with tic disorders yourself, handwriting is one of those things you can't really get away from. You've got to be able to at least have, a functional signature, so that you can, sign things away, sign your life away, give all your money away. You need to have a functional signature, but you also need to have a way of getting your thoughts on paper, getting your thoughts out for other people to, to benefit from what you have to say and what your ideas are. So handwriting, as old as it is, we really can't get away from it. And so either improving it, or giving a way to accommodate for it, which would be, the technology route, are I guess the big two take homes with regard to this particular discussion today. These are the references that I used in the for the talk today, and we'll open it up for questions. Are you there, Angela?
Yes, I'm
There
here.
you are.
Hi. Alrighty. Well, we're going to start answering some questions that were submitted during the presentation. If we don't get to everyone's questions, as a reminder, we will be collecting them and getting them out to Dr. Rao so that your questions will be answered. You can still ask questions going to the questions pane in the control panel, and we'll make sure that we get to as many as possible. Okay, so let's see. Since we know that kids with Tourette's are very smart, I think it's especially frustrating for them to not be able to express themselves in writing. Do you have any feedback about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And so I think that, again, looking at either asking for OT service in your school, at least have the occupational therapist do an evaluation of the child. They're eligible for OT-based services in the school, specifically related to handwriting. And if not, then maybe some private OT to look at handwriting as well. Again, I know that handwriting, because it's difficult for kids with tic disorders, it's not something that they're going to be thrilled about. So maybe mixing it up with, again, depending on age, maybe mixing it up with part using technology and then part handwriting to make improvements would be a little more palatable for them. And then I would also ask the occupational therapist to, try to break that up as well, teaching them skills now and helping them to improve their handwriting at this moment, but also maybe introducing some technology that they can use as they grow and as expectations get more demanding for them.
Great, thank you. There was one other comment too about whether or not you were looking for participants for future studies. I know that you mentioned one in particular, but if you want to just share some information, I think that everyone could probably reach out to you directly, but if you had some information about that.
Yeah, so that handwriting study is just now kicking off. We've just begun recruiting and accepting people for that. So it's definitely not too late to contact me about that. And again, that information is on the slide, but you can just email me at jan.rowe, that's ROWE, @childrensal.org. And let me know that you're interested and I will get back with you. That's the only handwriting intervention study from an occupational therapy standpoint that I know of at this point. But certainly, if I know of others or hear of others, I try to let the Tourette Association know so that they can put that information out on their website as well.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, next question. You are describing my 13-year-old son perfectly. Our school doesn't focus on handwriting, yet they don't teach typing either. They have him use speech to text, but it's filled with errors, and I worry he's not learning proper grammar, spelling, and punctuation this way.
Yeah, so that really can be a big problem, obviously, as you're seeing. I think there are some really good typing tutorials for teenagers that you can get off of YouTube, and just go online and search for typing tutorials for teenagers. There are some pretty good ones out there. I've had some success with students in schools learning to do that on their own. The other thing, if your child has a 504 or an IEP, you can ask for that typing or keyboarding to be taught to him or her. Again, it could be by the occupational therapist at the school. You can get services with a 504, so don't let them tell you you can't. So ask for maybe the OT to teach your child basic keyboarding, or have them work with the computer teacher at the school, and ask for that to be incorporated into their 504. If you get, I guess, pushback on that, then, certainly reach out to the Tourette Association, or you can reach out to me. I can give more information about how we've been successful in getting that done in the past. But that's what I would suggest. The other thing with regard to just speech to text, there are, some problems embedded with that, specifically, like you're saying, with regard to grammar and punctuation. So, maybe looking at one of the other software programs in combination with that, like Co-Writer or OneNote, or some of the other actual software programs that help with, that provide that scaffolding for writing, and that help with building the writing logistics at the same time that the speech to text is happening. I hope that helps.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next question. Do you know of any digital recorders for writing that would accommodate for someone with a vocal tic? In the previous session, someone commented how they tried a recorder for typing, but due to their vocal tic, it was unsuccessful.
Wow, that's a good one. I don't know of anything specific. Wow, that's a really good question. I'm stumped. I don't know of anything specific. The CBIT therapist, of course, in me would say, hopefully they could use a strategy to help interrupt the vocal tic, so that they would be able to do the speech to text. That's all I've got. I'm sorry.
No problem. Okay, let's see. I think this is in reference to something that you mentioned during your slides. Just curious, what type of feedback is the tablet giving on the writing study? Is it only visual?
It is visual. There are no alarms or anything like that. So it has like a pop-up screen, and it's almost like a chat, but then it also has like a graphic. If you're applying too much pressure, it goes from like red to green. So there's the chat, almost like a chat message that you get, but nothing auditorily.
Okay, great. Next question. My son is in 6th grade and the teachers have been wonderful scribing for him at times. He also uses voice to text when possible. Is it okay to use a scribe if permitted through high school, or would that be a non-sustainable crutch? Note that I also scribe for him on occasion with homework.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's a crutch by any means. The thing with Scribes, I oftentimes recommend Scribes for kids, and I don't think that there's a problem with that. At the same time that somebody's scribing for him, though, you want him to try to still get as much as he can on his own, whether that's voice to text, or actually trying to keep up and write himself. You don't want him to lose the skills that he already has with regard to graphomotor writing. So, him writing at the same time that a scribe is writing, and then being able to compare what he got and what the scribe got, is a great way to help him develop his skills, and also maintain what he still has. Now, he may never improve. He may never get any more, writing skills than what he has now. And so at that point, he's probably going to be reliant on voice to text, or a scribe in the future. Again, I don't see it as a crutch as long as he's doing everything that he can now to better his skills and improve them. There may be a point, and there probably is a point, at which those skills will plateau, and then he's left with technology and the accommodation of having to scribe. He certainly can go through college having somebody scribe for him as well. So it's not an impairment. It's not, something that's going to take away from his education. But at this point, given his age, I would still ask that he do as much as he can, and for no other reason, so that he doesn't lose what he already has.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, next question. Do you have any recommendations for how much time per day should this person encourage their child who is 8 years old with dysgraphia, TS, and generalized anxiety to write? She is homeschooled, so just wondering as a guide for age and grade with the considerations to these deficits.
Yeah, so when we came up with our inclusion criteria for the study that I have going now, I looked at all of this literature, and the one systematic review that I showed you out of Canada basically said nothing less than 20 minutes a day. We also found some studies that looked at 15-minute increments of writing per day. So that's why we did the 15 to 20 minutes per day. And it does need to be daily. So, your child can pick and choose the days, but it does need to be 5 of 7 days for 15 to 20 minutes at a time. Now, given the coexisting conditions and the anxiety that's there, I'm not, I wouldn't start with 15 or 20 minutes. I would build up to that. Maybe, getting her to do 5 minutes a day for the first week and see what she's able to do with that. It's not, right now you don't even really care about accuracy. You're just trying to get the actual skill moving in the right direction. It's important to sort of keep everything in mind that it is a huge endeavor for her to write. And the last thing she's going to want to do is write to then be checked for accuracy. So just get it out of her in terms of like what's in her head, or what you're having her copy, or whatever it is the writing sample is. Just have her do it regardless of error, regardless of speed, but work up to that 15 20 minutes, and then begin to ask for refinement, ask for accuracy. Layer those pieces on so that she's not having to deal with everything at once, because that can be terribly frustrating. And it's a huge effort. So it's very, very fatiguing mentally and physically.
Okay, great. This is a follow-up question to the one previous. At the age of 11, should this boy continue with OT on handwriting if he isn't progressing, or should we allow him to move 100% to technology?
Well, not knowing really anything about, what's been happening in OT, and I mean, I understand that he hasn't been progressing, but what have they been doing in OT? What kinds of intervention have they been using? Has it been strictly a focus on handwriting and production of handwriting, or has it been, has it have his visual perceptual and visual spatial skills been tested? Are there problems with that? Has that also been looked at in terms of intervention? I mean, not knowing any of that, I would say if all things have been covered and there's still no improvement, then probably a move to technology, at least, in part, is recommended. I don't often recommend a full and total jump, especially at an age of like 11. Sometimes, I mean, I have worked with kids in the past that, again, depending on the coexisting comorbid conditions, there are times when it's just not really healthy for them anymore, emotionally or mentally healthy for them to continue the angst of writing. So I wouldn't say that I would never recommend that, but maybe, a portion of technology and a portion of still handwriting. You as the parent know your child the best though, and you also know what's been done with them with regard to therapy. So my recommendation would be go with your gut. And if you feel like everything has been tried and everything's been looked at that contributes to handwriting, and there's just no improvement, then yeah, you're probably looking at a move to, if not completely, then in part to technology.
Okay, great. So we do have quite a bit of questions asking about dysgraphia. So I'm going to try and lump them all together. Some are similar, but so the first one, can you in general talk more about dysgraphia? Our 10-year-old daughter with Tourette Plus was recently diagnosed. Writing is an awful experience for her, but I am sensing there is a big difference with dysgraphia versus the physical considerations that you've addressed. And then somebody else asked that that their daughter has never been diagnosed with dysgraphia, but she does suspect it. How do I know if it's TS difficulty versus dysgraphia?
You know, really the best way to tease all of this out is to have your child tested specifically for dysgraphia. Now, some schools are actually doing this now. There's been a big push for schools to test both for dyslexia and dysgraphia, and so some schools are actually doing that. Many occupational therapists in school-based practices can test for dysgraphia, but most of the time that is done by well, I wouldn't say most of the time. Sometimes it's also done by psychology. So I would have them tested to see if they actually have a diagnosis of dysgraphia, or if it is more, you know, these issues that we see with regard to kids with tic disorders. Dysgraphia is, you know, a specific learning disability. It is often improved with handwriting therapy by an occupational therapist. And so but you know, it's not done in a silo. It's, you know, because it also then involves reading and interpretation of reading to then get what you're reading onto paper. It needs to be dealt with both by the OT as well as the teacher and parent. So again, it's one of those situations that can really have some great improvement in a school system if you can get OT to pick your child up for that. But if you're still questioning the diagnosis, then I would just have them specifically tested for that. And just asking for an occupational therapy evaluation in your school. If your child has a 504 or an IEP already, that is easily done. If they don't, then you can, you know, have them tested by an outpatient occupational therapist for dysgraphia.
Okay, great. Next question. Do you have any feedback on if there is a connection with poor handwriting and poor speech?
I don't write offhand. I would garner to say that there is a relationship, but I am not aware, right off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any literature. I really can't speak to it. I'm sorry.
Okay. If the person who wrote that question is still interested, just reach out to us and we can see what kind of information that we can find for you. Okay, let's see. Next question. Our daughter is very visual and loves to hash out ideas in picture symbols. Are these just as effective a tool to use in the classroom, perhaps in combination with speech to text for learning retention?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good idea and way for her to be able to express herself. You know, creative drawing and creative writing are very linked. One of the things about that OneNote through Microsoft that I was talking about earlier, if you're not already familiar with it, it includes drawings, or it includes ways to include drawings and graphs that either you yourself generate or that you can import into the document. So I think, you know, the combination of voice to text as well as drawings is a nice way to go, especially until she's either more interested or more able to do the graphomotor skill of actual writing.
Okay, great. Alrighty, next question. My son's school did start off testing, but avoided doing writing testing because of his difficulty with it. Now we are in a situation where they are not recognizing he has a writing issue and teachers are not really helping him, but telling him to do his best to take notes during the lecture. He comes home with horrible scribbles. The teachers have been asked to provide him with class notes, but few do. Do you have any suggestions or feedback?
Well, this is, I do have some suggestions, and it's, you're gonna have to get a little more tough with the school to have them actually do what they're supposed to do, especially if your child has a 504 or an IEP. If they don't, if your child doesn't already have one of those two, then I would say definitely go through that formal process and get the 504 at the very least for your child, because then once you have that in place, it's easier to make them stick to it. If they already have it and they're not doing it, then definitely call a meeting and, regroup and say, these are the things that my child has to have. You're just going to have be that child's advocate. And if you need to, have a mediator go with you, either somebody from the state or, somebody, maybe a friend or somebody through your local TS chapter or support group that can go with you, that's fought these battles before, that can sit with you and help articulate what your child needs. And especially if you're unfamiliar with the laws and what your child has the right to. Certainly the Tourette Association does a great job of this as well. They will be your advocate. Kathy Giordani is, excellent at that, and there are several other people with regard to the Educational Advisory Board that can help you with this as well.
Yes, absolutely. We are a great resource if you need some help figuring out ways to manage different things that are going on at school. Okay, just a couple more questions. What are your thoughts on raised line paper? I have always liked it for handwriting kids, but also am thinking of the study you're doing. Do you know of any apps that provide real-time vibration, visual, auditory feedback that may be good for kids who prefer technology?
I don't know of apps or software that provide that. I too have always liked the raised lines for writing, especially with, well, not even necessarily with younger kids, although as they get older, they tend not to want that because, they feel like it makes them look different. But I don't know of any apps that provide what you're asking for. That would be really good though. There are, if you haven't already looked at it, the OT Toolbox, I think it's ottoolbox.com, has a lot of the adaptive paper and adaptations for writing. So that would be something that I would probably look at. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, next question. My twins both have TS and struggle with handwriting, yet are very talented visual artists. What graphomotor functions differ and produce those extreme results?
Yeah, so it's, constructing letters for the purpose of writing is different than, using letters or numbers or geometrics to actually construct art, drawings, those kinds of things. So it's a different part of the brain. And there's also, when you layer the anxiety or the anticipation of getting something wrong when you're writing, that complicates the graphomotor act itself a little bit more. So, and I didn't even talk about, obviously, kids can have hand and arm tics as well that get in the way of their motor skills for writing. I myself have, have Tourette, and when I was younger, I learned how to hold my pen or pencil like this. So I'm one of those OTs that has a very, we call it an adaptive tripod. But the reason that I do this is because when I was younger, I actually had a tic where when I was holding my pen or pencil like this, which I can barely do, I had an arm tic where I had to straighten out and like pop my elbow. And whenever I did that, my pen or pencil would go flying across the room. And so to keep from embarrassing myself, my dad was also military, so we moved a lot, and I was, didn't want to be the new kid that was throwing her pencil around. So I just taught myself how to do this so that I could hold on to it tighter. So the actual act of writing is a different part of the brain than creating. And that's why you're seeing that discrepancy.
All righty, great. Okay. I think we have one more time for a few more questions. For a 6th to 7th grader, do you feel support with handwriting versus typing or voice typing would help with challenging students that have high IQs to match their brain power and increase the active learning?
Yeah, so again, in terms of learning, we know that, the active writing is better with regard to, what they learn, the concepts themselves. There's another study that looked at learning specific to science, math, and history. And what they found in that study was that children who wrote actually learned the concepts more than children who typed that information. So in terms of learning, I would say the writing is best, but to be able to get that information then out, then you may have to use a combination of technology as well. So much of this is a balancing act because you're trying to maintain both the, a neutral level with regard to emotion. So you're trying to take the anxiety, the frustration, maybe just the flat out anger about having to write. You're trying to keep all that at a minimum. At the same time that you're trying to elicit and support your child's ability to get out of their head what they know. So the learning is better supported through writing, but then written expression may be very difficult for them. So in terms of expressing what they know, that might be the point in which you ask them to use the combination of technology and writing.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that looks like all the questions have been answered. Great questions and great feedback, Dr. Rao, and an excellent presentation, of course. So just as a reminder, everyone, once the session is closed out, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We would greatly appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also be receiving a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with the link to view a recording of the session. Additionally, the session will be posted on the TAA's YouTube channel for those who were unable to participate today. Lastly, we do encourage you to reach out to us about this virtual conference or for other ideas and suggestions that you may have. This presentation was presented free of charge thanks to our generous donors. If you appreciated the session, we welcome you to support the organization. Visit us at Tourette's.org to learn more and to donate. On behalf of the Tourette Association of America, thank you again for joining us and taking the time to view our presentation. Please check out the rest of the sessions that are going on this afternoon. If you have any questions, let us know. And thank you again for joining. And thank you again, Dr. Rao. Hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks.